Boker Tov, good morning, happy Sabbath. This morning, we want to look at the subject, the Tzeva of divine origin, the color of divine origin. As we read through the scriptures, we see that they articulate a coherent pattern of reasoning, suggesting that dark bronze is the Tzeva, the color of origin. So essentially, the infallible averment they express will not return to Yah void, according to Isaiah 55 and verse 11. So no plea of abatement might stand against the procedural inerrancy of which Yah spoke to the patriarchs, the prophets, and the apostles. So this Sabbath morning, our study unites us with one object in mind: to examine the sacred inspired scrolls. And now we subpoena the pale artistic impressions of the Renaissance painters in Europe. They have used their brushes over time to change the complexion of the characters in the scriptures. It was not a random situation. Over time, systematically, they used their brushes. The artist, they painted, and these things were commissioned by popes and other people to change systematically the complexion of the people. Michelangelo was among them, Raphael, Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, Donatello. All these men were commissioned over time to make the faces of the characters in scriptures more adaptable and more likable to the audiences in Europe. And so this deliberate imagery, the profligacy of paleness, was used as a colonizing tool to imprison the mind of the people. That's how they did it. So the Western depiction still influences behaviors and institutions, the framework of their empires. Truth has been insidiously redacted and removed from the collective memory of the world, leaving wounded memories now being awakened by the truth of Yah. And so, usually in a civil case, the plaintiff usually bears the burden of proof to show that something has taken place. Such is our obligational intent to prove this claim, that the characters here in the scriptures that we constantly read, that they belong to a people and a civilization wearing the color of bronze black. These are the people, our ancestors. And we do that not out of envy, not out of hatred, but out of the search for truth. So our study today is an attempt to tell the truth. Because as we read through the scriptures, we realize that our story has never been told correctly. We see that. And so it is an attempt to tell our story truthfully, that the bronze black covenant people, many of which has been written out of their own history, are now coming to realize who they are. So we want to correct the quantum of intellectual, historical, and theological inexactitudes that have been allowed to exist even within the churches today. There is still an extension of it in that it still influences people. So it remains extant in the churches. And so we want to look at the scriptures and see if it makes sense to you as we present what the scripture says. So turn with me to the book of Azon. That's the book of Revelation. This is a book that I love to read because it dares you to read the book, because in so doing you get a blessing. Revelation chapter 1, and we will begin our search in verse 1. It says, revelation of Yeshua HaMashiach, which Elohim gave him to show his servants what has to take place with speed, and he signified it by sending his messengers to his servant Yohanan, who bore witness to the word of Yahweh and the witness of Yeshua HaMashiach to all who saw. Baruch is he who reads, and those who hear the words of this nebula and guard what is written in it, for the time is near. I'm reading from the Alleluia scriptures here, so the words might be a little bit different from your ordinary King James. Verse 4, Yohanan to the 7 assemblies that are in Asia, favor to you and peace from him who is and who was and who is coming, and from the 7 Ruach that are before his throne. The 7 spirits that are before his throne. So the essence here of the verses we've just read is that Yohanan had been banished to the island of Patmos for his fate by the emperor Domitian. He earlier had been thrown into a cauldron of hot oil. And having survived that, he was placed on the island of Patmos, at which time he received this vision. And he's told that he is to write down the things, what he had seen. Verse 19 of the same passage we read, write therefore what you have seen, both what is now and what shall take place after these things. Write it down. And make sure, Yohanan, you send these letters to the 7 churches, the 7 assemblies. Make sure they get them and they read these. We are in the era now of Laodicea, the last of the 7 assemblies. And we know that Laodicea received the letter. We know that. It's here. And we're reading that letter to us. And we cannot say, return to sender. we know such number. We know the address. It was correctly addressed to us, and we, like the other assemblies, we are reading it. So we've received it. And so let's turn to verse 12. The word says, this is Yohanan, and he's letting you know what transpired during that process. He said, when I heard the voice speaking, the voice of Yeshua, I turned to see the voice which spoke with me, and having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And we know those lampstands are the 7 assemblies. They are the light. So when Yeshua said, you are the light of the world, he meant that. He's saying, you who wear my character, a genuine character, you are the light of the world. And in this age of darkness, you ought to let your light shine forth. So Yohanan said, I turned and I saw one who looked like the son of Adam. He looked like the son of Adam, dressed in a robe down to the feet and girdled about the chest with a golden band, and his head of his hair were white as wool. We're talking here texture. His hair was like wool. And so we see now that we have started to repudiate the inexactitude that the artists in Renaissance Europe had used their paintbrushes to deceive the people. His hair is not long, goat-like, and his skin is not of a palish white complexion. And so the word says his hair is like wool, and his eyes are the flaming fire. What color is fire? More like goldish bronze eyes. His feet like burnished brass. It's not even light-colored brass. It's as if it's burned in a furnace. And his voice as the voice of many waters. But the Renaissance painters, they've used their brush to change the complexion of Yeshua and his image to make him more favorable, more suitable to their audiences in Europe. And so we see the word of Yah repudiates that idea. So when we said that the color of origin is bronze black, the word confirms that. It affirms that, because Yeshua himself said, I am the first, and I am the last. I am the beginning, and I am the end. I am the Aleph, and I am the Tav. That's the Hebrew. In the Greek, it says, I am the Alpha, and I am the Omega. So if Yeshua is the first, the Aleph, and his skin is bronze, dark bronze, then indeed the original color is bronze. It's there in the word. And so we just want to look at that even more so, because we know Yohanan said, when I saw him, he was in the midst of the candlesticks. That's what Yohanan said. And many times we have read over that, and people have read over that, but we want to dilate a little upon that. He saw him in the midst of the candlesticks. Yohanan is told that the 7 candlesticks that he saw, they represent 7 assemblies situated in Asia Minor in Turkey. They are the 7 churches. They were individual churches, and they represent individual time and the spiritual condition of the church in that age. And remember also that these were not mainstream churches, they were house assemblies. So the question that I want to ask you is, which of the era was Yeshua seen? Yohanan says, I saw him in the midst. Now we have 7 assemblies. So the midst of that 7 assembly would be Thyatira, that being the fort. So he's saying, I saw him in the midst, in the era of Thyatira. And we know that history informs us that this is the period when the Roman Catholic Church was in its heyday. So it makes sense why Yeshua would want to be in the midst, in the era of Thyatira at this particular time. Why do I say so? You see, we can read and stay with the denotative meaning here, but we want to look at the connotative meaning of this, in the sense that it is this period of time and it is this particular institution that commissioned the artist with their brushes to paint the characters in the Word, to make them more favorable to the audiences of Europe. So we get a Eurocentric presentation of the scriptures. And so when I talk about the profligacy of paleness that was used to deceive the vulnerable audiences throughout, even the churches, we've got to understand the depth that these people went to change the writing of Yahweh. And so the question must be asked, who is so stout in power? And who is so wise in intellect? And who is so vacant in conscience to have done this? And we don't have to conjecture. History informs us. We still have the extant images, pictures, painting that people now call masterpieces. They put them in museums, even their minds. But Yah, when he spoke morality to Israel, he said, don't make any graven images, above or below. So we see these so-called masterpieces that sometimes travel all the way to auction houses and people bid on them. The word of Yah says they're not masterpieces, they're graven images. We've got to understand that. So again, you see how consistent, how deliberate, and how stubborn the word of Yah is in repudiating this matter. And so we want to make it known that this institution was the one who patronized these things. And so from that, the empires emerged. And I can understand why when the apostle Shaul wrote in Colossians 2:1, he says, "For I would that ye knew what great conflict I have for you and for them at Laodicea." That's us. Because Laodicea, not knowing what took place at the head of the stream when Constantine came in, now we're drinking downstream, and all we're drinking is dregs. There is dregs in your theological liquid. He says, "And as for many as have not seen my face in the flesh." Again, he wrote in chapter 4 of Colossians 12 and verse 13, "Epaphras, who is one of you, a servant of Yeshua, saluteth you, always laboring fervently for you in prayers, that he may stand perfect and complete in all the will of Yahweh. For I bear him record that he hath a great zeal for you, and them that are in Laodicea, and them in Hierapolis." And so you see, years after Yeshua's ascension, the apostle here is saying, "I have great interest in the people of Laodicea." Those who are going to be drinking downstream, they are not going to know what transpired in earlier days by Constantine and others. And so let's turn to chapter 2 of Azon, that's the book of Revelation, because he wrote in relation to the church of Pergamos, verse 12, "And to the messenger of the assembly in Pergamos write, He who has a sharp two-edged sword says this, I know your works, where you dwell, where the throne of Satan is." Esther tells us this is the period, this is the time, round about 312 AD, when Constantine came into the institution of religion. It was the time of Pergamos, and Yeshua said this was where Satan's seat is. So he's letting you know what was the condition spiritually at the time when Constantine came in. He's letting us know that. And he goes on to tell us that at this time, Balaam was the teacher. Balaam. And as you know that Constantine is said to have had a vision in which he saw the sign of a cross. And in this vision, he heard the saying, "In hoc signo vinces." In hoc signo vinces, meaning in this sign you will conquer. And so he related that sign of the cross to Christianity. Subsequently, he made Christianity the state religion, and Christianity has since been the state religion. It is the religion of the Roman Empire, and from which all the churches branched out during the process of the Protestant Reformation. So it matters not what you call your assembly. You may well see only the branches today, but they are connected to the tree. We've got to understand the historical nature of that. And it was that institution that commissioned the painters and the writers to change the revealed word of Yah. And so we're using Yah's word this morning to challenge that situation and to present that burden of proof in this civil matter. We want you to understand that. And so the word is very clear that the characters were bronze, and we are the descendants of such people. That era we call the medieval period, the Dark Ages. And that's between the 5th to the 15th century. And then we had the Renaissance era, when they came with their paintbrushes. That's from the 14th to the 17th century. And it's marked by a rebirth of classical learning, which focused on humanism. And I find that almost laughable in the sense that they talk about humanism when they don't even know what it's like to be a human. And all you have to do is to ask a slave. If you knew what it's like to be a human, you would not enslave other humans like that. And that's what they did. And so this morning, we want to dismiss those titular theologians who have perpetuated these matters and have continued in their pulpits to deceive the people. Turn with me to the book of Daniel, and we will look at chapter 10, and we will do verse 6. Daniel is there, and he says he had a vision, and his body was like beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms as his feet of the color of polished bronze. Some Bible says brass. And his voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. So repeatedly, we're seeing that the scriptures depict even the heavenly beings are bronze. It's there. Angels do not carry the pale forms of the European brushes, the artist brushes. No, they do not. Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, and others, they, as I indicated, change the complexion, but the word of Yah is stubborn. It's stubborn. Come with me to Ezekiel, chapter 1, we'll do 4 to 8. And I looked and saw a whirlwind coming out of the north, a great cloud with a flashing itself, and the brightness was all around it. And out of the midst, like a glowing metal, out of the midst of fire, also out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures. And this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man, and everyone had 4 faces, and everyone had 4 wings, and their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of calf's foot, and they sparkled like the color of burnished bronze. Again, that when the angels come, when the beings, the celestial beings, appear on earth, they come as bronze people, not as pale-skinned people, as the Renaissance artist has painted them. And so as we read this, we understand that when Yah decided to make human beings, he said, I'm going to make man in my own image. I'm going to make Adam the way that I look. So he took a piece of clay from the continent of Africa, the same color as the people that would live there, and he fashioned Adam like him. Same woolly hair, same bronze dark burnished skin. That's the word of Yah. And I wonder, how is it that throughout the ages, ministers of religion, bishops and priests, stood in their pulpits and have read these things and have presented a different kind of Messiah. Clearly, they have left the faith. Clearly, they have left the faith. So the true images of the chosen black people were changed in the libraries of the world, but never in the annals of heaven. They remain. But you must realize that coincidences cannot so regularly regulate or replicate themselves with such exactitude, except they be the science of divinity. A truth many have been prohibited to consider is the sacredness of bronze skin. It cannot now be hidden. It's in the Word. And Yah is revealing light. And we ought to not put these images of the institution of the church into our homes and into our museum, but put this truth in the gallery of our minds. So we understand that the original skin is bronze. It's clear in the Word. And so you may well ask me, so if that's the case, and the people to which you refer, not precluding yourself, how did they become so rejected and despised? Come with me to the book of Devarim. Devarim, that's Deuteronomy chapter 28. Now, you've got to understand the context here. Please understand the context. Moshe, that's Moses, is here talking to these people who had recently left Egypt, Mitzrayim, and we're told there were others among them than just ourselves, a mixed multitude. So he's telling them that you are a people that Yah has chosen to carry the covenant. We're covenant carriers, covenant keeping people. We must understand that. And so Moshe is addressing this group of people. He says, within this carrying of the covenant, if you obey Yah, there will be blessing. You will be Baruch. And if you don't, you will be cursed. Let's read chapter 28 of Devarim. And it shall be, if you diligently obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim, to guard, to do all his commands, which I command you today, that Yahweh your Elohim shall make you high above all nations of the earth. The dark-skinned people, the bronze people, who look like Africans, some Shemitic, some Ethiopian, Cushites. It says, if you obey Yah, you will be the head and not the tail. And all these Baruchah shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim. Just walk straight. You'll be a blessing to the world. The world will look to you. You will be the head and not the tail. Baruch is the fruit of your body, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your livestock, the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flocks. Baruch is your basket and your kneading bowl. You will have so much to live on and the purpose to live for if you obey Yah. Hear me. So when you ask the question, why is Africa now so poor? It's here. If you obey me, your basket will never be in want. Verse 6, Baruch are you when you come in, and Baruch are you when you go out. Yahweh causes your enemies who rise against you to be smitten before your face. They come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways. That's what Yah says. But he says, if we disobey, if we ever disobey, verse 15, and it shall be, if you do not obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim, to guard, to do all the commands and his laws, which I command you today, that all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Curse are you in the city, and curse are you in the field. Curse is your basket, the very same one that he said he would bless. And your kneading bowl, curse is the fruit of your body and the fruit of your land, the increase of your cattle and the offspring of your flocks. Curse are you when you came in, and curse are you when you go out. Yahweh send on you the curse, the confusion, the rebuke in all that you put your hand to, until you are destroyed and until you perish quickly because of the evil of your doing, by which you have forsaken me. Yahweh makes the plague cling to you until he has consumed you from the land which you are going to possess. So you see here that obedience means blessings and disobedience means cursing. So come with me now to verse 68 of the same book. Yahweh says, and Yahweh shall bring you back to Mitzrayim in ships by a way of which I said to you, you are never to see it again, and there you shall be sold to your enemies as male and female slaves, but no one will buy. That buy is not talking about purchase. I'm going to put you back on ships. Now understand this. If he's telling you that these people here are going to go again a second time on ships to Egypt, meaning bondage, it means that they are the descendants of the original group. And if these people here are black, then the original group could not be pale or white. We've got to understand that. And the other question we must ask ourselves in order to rebuke and repudiate the inexactitude, the quantum of it, is how many groups of people do you know, historically and otherwise, who have ever been taken on ships to Britain, to the Americas, to the Caribbeans, to Brazil, and elsewhere as slaves? How many? One group of people. That's the bronze black people that the Bible speaks about. So as we read, we are reading our own story that others have written us out of. We've got to understand that. We must look at that and understand that Yah requires us to not only know this by knowledge, but it puts a responsibility upon us. Moses is here speaking to the children of Israel. And Moses is speaking such because at age 27, he himself was king of the Cushites. And he was married to an Ethiopian woman. And so it makes sense this morning that we look at that in the book of Bermidbar, chapter 12. That was read for us earlier. That's the book of Bermidbar, that's the book of Numbers, chapter 12. Now Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moshe because of the Cushite wife whom he had taken, for he had taken a Cushite wife. He had taken a bronze woman. Now, don't make the assumption, as some do here, that because the Bible speaks of a Cushite woman, that Moses was any other complexion. We must not assume that. Moses was the same complexion. The difference was she was Cushite and he was Hebrew. The issue here was one of belief, not color, not complexion. We've got to understand that because, as you know, Moses himself was taken out of a bulrush basket and lived in Black Pharaoh's house with Pharaoh's daughter for several years, people of the same complexion. We have Joseph, the son of Jacob, being prime minister of Egypt, and he was of the same color. And so the point here is that Yah makes the distinction only because he shows the unity in Amos 9:7. He said, "Are you not the same to me, O Israel, as the Ethiopian?" You're the same people. And so I can see the nimble fingers of the Renaissance painters now. It must have been a people without conscience to have gone to such length to paint the patriarchs, the prophets, the apostles in the pale light of day when the word said, no, they are deep bronze, just like their creator. So when Yah made man, come, let us make him in our own image. How then could I be upset? How then could I be angry at anyone who calls me black, bronze, when I look like my creator? David understood it. David said, I am wonderfully and beautifully made. I agree with him. I agree with King David. And so those people who are prone to purchase bleach for whatever reason, we just say that bodies that are free, if your mind is still enslaved, even though you call yourself a free man, no, you're a slave because you don't even know who you are. And so we want to rid ourselves of the designation that they have given us and stick to what Yah says we are. This is the original color, took from the earth. He didn't go to Europe. He stayed in that region. And he made man in his own image. So this morning, we're thankful to Yahweh that he has been so good to us But as we indicated earlier, that at the time that Constantine came into the church, Balaam was a teacher. And the church that followed Thyatira, followed Pergamum, he tells us that Jezebel was a teacher. Now imagine yourself going into college, university to study, and when you get there, your two leading professors are Balaam and Jezebel. What do you think would be the outcome of your study? You would come out of college with a degree that's worth nothing because it's all false. Such it was that the paintings and the writings that they produce were influenced by the mind of Balaam and the teachings of Jezebel. Martin Luther understood this latterly. So the year was 1505. A young law student was on his way from school one summer afternoon. And there was a thunderstorm. And the boats started to locate near where he was walking. And he became frightened. And one struck him, threw him to the ground. And he cried out, "Save Saint Anna. I will be a monk." Remember, Martin Luther was here studying to be a lawyer. But so frightened by what he had seen, what he had experienced, he decided, I'm going to be a monk. And this young law student enrolled into that Augustinian monastery over there in Erfurt in Germany, and he became a monk. But as he reflects through the scriptures, a Bible chained, he stumbled across Romans 1:17, and he realized the just must live by faith. Martin Luther said, I will no longer climb Pilate's stairway. On his first mission to Rome, he says, Holy Rome, I salute you. I venerated all the sacred relics, just like some of us today. We're venerating the sacred relics. That's what they are, relics. When the word of Yah is full with gems. And so Martin Luther understood this, and the Reformation was on the way. The Church of Sardis. But what did Yeshua say about the Church of Sardis? He said it's a dead church. He said, I will come to you like a thief in the night. He doesn't come to the real church as a thief in the night, because those of us who understood it is that the dead church is those who are sleeping, those who don't understand the prophecies, and those whose theology is not consistent with their lived faith. And so Shaul speaks of them. He says, chapter 4, verse 1 of Timotheus, or Timothy, but the Ruach, who? The Ruach, Akadash, distinctly says that in the latter time, that's now, some shall fall away from the belief, from the faith, paying attention to misleading spirits and teachings of demons. They will continue down the ages to listen to the teachings of Balaam and of Jezebel or Isabel. Speaking what? Lies in hypocrisy. They also paint lies with their brushes. And so when you think of this thing contextually, that Constantine came into the church and he welded paganism with Christianity. And so Luther rebelled against that, and they call that the Protestant Reformation. And thereafter, many of the churches branched out, giving different names. They may have left Rome, but did Rome leave them? Or what do you mean? Well, when Yah spoke morality in Mount Sinai and said we should keep the Shabbat and keep the feast days and all the commands that he had given us, the majority of people today in Christendom, they keep the first day of the week. They give him Sunday. They give him Christmas. In a few weeks, they will be celebrating Nimrod's son. They will. Crying for who? Tammuz. So the question is the Reformation really, did it do anything for them? They give you Easter rather than Passover. But now, people everywhere, little groups, pockets of them, are coming into the realization that this truth transcends the lies that we've been told. Come with me to Jeremiah chapter 52. And we will take verse 17. And the Kasdites broke the bronze column. You're going to see how many times bronze is mentioned in this passage. And were in the house of Yahweh, and the stands and the bronze sea that were in the house of Yahweh, and brought in their bronze to Babel. They also took away the pots and the shovels and the snuffers and the bowls and the ladies and all the bronze utensils with which they served, and the basins and the fire holders and the bowls and the pots and the lampstand and the ladies and the cups, whatever was in solid gold and whatever was in solid silver. The chief of the guard took the 2 columns, 1 sea, the 12 bronze bowls which were under it, and the stands which sovereign Shalom had made for the house of Yahweh. You see, King Solomon knew the significance of bronze from the heaven. So what is in heaven, what is bound in heaven, he made sure it was bound on earth as well. That's the original color. And so we don't have to be embarrassed to anyone. In fact, we should thank Yah for what has happened to us in the way he made us. So the question is that, having read earlier that Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moshe, Yah heard it and came down. He said to them, all the other prophets I spoke to them in the past in dreams and visions, but not Moshe, not this Cushite king. No, I don't talk to this Cushite king like that. I speak to him face to face. Were you not afraid were you not afraid? Remember, Aaron is the high priest. And Miriam is an evangelist. She's a prophetess. Yah is no respecter of persons. Were you not afraid to speak to Moshe like that? And the word says, she was struck with leprosy, and she became white as snow. Logic would seem to indicate that if she turned white, Miriam must have been some other color prior to that. You see, truth has to be logically consistent. It has to be what? Verifiable. And it must be existentially relevant to the times in which you live. And so, if this act here of prejudice crept into Miriam's mind, that she loathed, disliked the choice of Moses, an Ethiopian woman, and it angered Yah, he came down and brought them into council. If he did that, can we not assume, can we not imagine that of all those slaves that were whipped with the slave master's whip, pulled behind pickup trucks and dragged along the street, could not drink at the same water fountain as other people, could not use the same bathroom as other people, the same bronze people, could not sit at the front row of the bus? Will it not anger Yah? Of course it will. These people who he made in his image, Yah's mill, it grinds slow, but it grinds very fine. And so they have not gotten away with it. The people who spoke out, nooses were put around their necks. And they were denied civil liberties. They could not preach from the same pulpits as other people. And of course, this is the land of the free and the brave. My mind is drawn back to last year, when Yah put the culmination of the two eclipses together, 7 years apart, one in 2017 and the other in 2024. And interestingly, where they intercepted is left an X. In the Hebrew, that would represent a tav. Yah says, I am the Aleph and the tav. The tav, as you know, is the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet, as the omega is in the Greek. So if he is the alpha and he's putting the tav, he's saying the end is come. The end is come. But that tav that he put over America, over a place called Little Egypt in Illinois, is the same sign, mark, that was used in Ezekiel chapter 9. Seal all my people, then destroyed. Walk through Jerusalem and seal my people. One cannot not think of the fact that in that period of time, Yah had been sealing his people. And is about to put this nation and others under judgment. So it doesn't matter what they say or what they do. The world doesn't know now that none can contend with Michael, who fights the battle for Yah's people. And so it is important to realize that the insidious practice of changing the faces, the complexions of the biblical characters to make them look like someone else, it is a crime that is beyond comprehension. It is. Enculturation. That's what it was. It was so insidious. And so the forged nails of deceit, they were hammered into the bronze wrist of Africa through the bones of biblical understanding, nearing the base of the writing finger of Yah, from which he wrote, while the cause of death of Africa was asphyxia, the irony is that Africa, like Yah, is not dead. Africa is reviving. Africa is coming again by way of the knowledge that Yah is putting into the minds of his people. It is no exaggeration to say that. And so Israel is still situated at the intersection of many different religions and culture. And the bronze people are prophetically posed for victory. Oh, yes. And no one can fight against Yah. And so those Egyptians that you saw yesterday, the word of Yah says, you shall see them no more forever. So we shall walk through that Red Sea. It's not a physical sea this time, but it's a sea of understanding. A sea of understanding. So won't you help to sing that song of freedom? It is a redemption song. Of course, this is a redemption assembly. And so to bring this to its end, we just want to remind you that it was Constantine who in 313 AD liberated Christianity and made it a free religion. Prior to that, it was not free to worship openly. And so many of the denominations that we ingratiate ourselves into today are but extension of that earlier institution of Rome. And it is for us to look into the Word and make sense of it and realize that you were written out of your own story, and others have told your story and have fabricated so much of it that it behooves you to go and study for yourself. For such we ask. And thank Yah for revealing himself to us in such clear tone, the perspicuity of which you can't miss. In Yeshua's name I say, amen.